Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our lunchtime early season pest management session. Today, our speaker is Dr. Kevin Kerr, and I'm sure that most, if not all of you, are familiar with him from last year and the year before. First, he was here to help out with the polar vortex recovery. And then last year, he was also here managing me through my transition and also mentoring me through the transition as well. Thank you very much, Kevin, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And welcome, everyone. So here we just have the QR code for your pest management points. If you scan this, you'll receive a receipt, which will then allow you to collect the points as well. I will also have this slide at the end of the presentation as well, in case you've missed it right now. The session is also being recorded, so if you do need to see it or hear it again, the link will be provided in a couple of days. So without any further ado, I will let Kevin take the rest. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to...
Let's see, stop sharing. Here we go. Perfect.
Let's do this. I'm going to share. Get to this one. Oop. All right. And says I'm screen sharing. That's good. 14, so we're not too bad. Okay, let's go to escape, I think. Hide video.
We see everything.
There we go. All right, we're in business now. For those who were around last spring, this may be just kind of a refresher for you. I've got a few extra things that I've decided to put in. Since it is Nova Scotia, I have to wear my Chester, Nova Scotia t-shirt. As some have told me, I'm a part-time maritimer for the amount of time I spend there. So we're going to go along. A number of these slides came from other people, along with my own collection, and I've utilized information produced by other people. One new one that I've included this year is from a fellow by the name of Brian Head out of Penn State University. He's probably the guru on black rot, so I grabbed some of his slides. He'd done a presentation in Ontario. He and I go way back, farther than most people would want to ever admit. And we're going to jump right into it because I've kind of taken a different approach this year of hopefully getting you to think about where we're going. And one of the things are right off the top, you need to think about what are your pests that are most concerned to you, not somebody else in the province, not somebody else in Canada, but recognize, you know, that you're growing different things than a lot of people in the rest of North America. So each one's have different susceptibilities. So your pests of concern are going to be different. Similarly, some pests are present early in the season. Others are present not until mid to late season. So you need to sketch out kind of what's the issue at what time of the year and go forward. And then how much time do you actually have to apply control measures? And by this, I mean, you better make sure that your equipment is tuned up, set up, and ready to go so that you can cover it, because in some cases you may only have 24 hours to 36 hours to get something done and in place. And if you don't, you may wind up being 4 or 5 days behind, and then you're in bigger trouble. How much do you want to spend? Yes, there are some what I call high-end materials out there, but people start to look at the price points and say, how can I do it cheaper? Well, it is possible to do things less expensively, but generally it requires more applications, and you have to be judicious, recognizing they don't last as long. And finally, the last one is people have to read the labels. Read them closely. What is a re-entry interval? You need to have occupational health and safety on your mind for your workers going back out to do handwork. You need to be aware of the pre-harvest interval when it comes to that time of the year, because your winery buyer is not going to want to have stuff. You can't go in. Is there phytotoxicity? Some products cannot be used too close to another product. Some products can't be mixed with other products. So probably the one that I was given the most advice on is the label is the law. If it says okay on the label, then it's okay. But if it doesn't say it on the label, you better double check on 2 or 3 other labels because sometimes they don't fit. And also, some products that we talk generically about, such as sulfur, have multiple formulations and they all have different restrictions on them. So you need to be aware. It may seem simple that, well, it's the same active ingredient. Yes, but the manufacturers have different requirements to get their label registered. So be aware of that. So what I want you to think about, what time of the season? So you need to think about the developmental stages and susceptibilities. And so what pests are going to be there? And have you had a problem with this? Is this something that's been new to you? Or is it something you seem to fight every year, day in, day out type of thing? So I consider it, it's kind of like, are the pests taxes that you have to pay every year? Or is it something that's more like a fine that shows up once in a while? I'm going to provide you information later on that's going to have some charts included with it that indicate cultivars and susceptibility. It's not complete, as there are a lot of new cultivars that are being grown in the area. Some of them are numbered cultivars that you may have that may not be on the list. So you need to be aware of that, whether there's issues. How long does it take? Is your sprayer calibrated? What you start the season with and what you end the season with, your sprayer should change over time. The canopy changes, the amount of leaves change. You're going from a point where no fruit is present to fruit is present, and you're also going to a point where you have pre-bloom tiny little florets, and at the end you have full-size clusters that need to be protected. You need to choose the right product, and you still need to practice resistance management, and it's coming more and more to the front for everyone. So if you had a high amount of overwintering inoculum, cleanliness is always the best thing to start with. Cleaning up your vineyard. That doesn't mean you have to take everything out and burn it or burn it on site, but definitely get it away from beneath the actual vine architecture. Get it out into the middle of the row. Use a mower, flail mower, anything to grind up the prunings. That's always a good thing. Some people, you need to be aware, if you over fertilize, put too much on, what you'll get is soft, succulent growth, but it's also very susceptible to infection. Crown gall, and this comes up every year for everybody. There is nothing registered for a topical application for crown gall. It's inside the plant. So be aware of that. We can renew, we can retrain, but there's no magic spray that's going to protect you from crown gall. And high weed pressure. If you let the weeds go, then you create high humidity and other things. Diseases could be a real problem. And it may interfere later in the season with your actual coverage. I'm going to go through some slides. I've got a few more here, and then I'm going to show you a slide with the growth stages that Katarina has put out on her fact sheet for you to use. You need to know what your growth stages are when the buds are fully dormant. Have they started to break bud and grow? So that'd be a green tip. And basically you talk about your first leaf beginning to emerge up to 5 centimeters of growth. The next one is 3 to 5 leaves there present. An interesting thing is determining, people want to know when bloom begins. You'll notice when the shoots get to about 25 centimeters in length or more, the flowers will suddenly start to separate, the individual florets. And the picture on the right is showing you where the florets have separated. You're probably within 2 to 3 days of bloom when it hits that stage. Then you have full bloom when most of the caps have fallen. Grapes are a unique creature in that they actually are reverse. What you think you're seeing are the florets. On those florets you think are flower petals or things. No, the petals actually fell off. What's left behind is the stigma and the style. That's the white things you see present on there. That's where the pollen's coming from. And in many cases, grapevines pollinate before the caps fall off or as the cap falls off. You don't need cross-pollination for this. So we're not as reliant upon bees for fertilization as maybe tender fruit crops or such as cherries, which may require it, or apples. Grapes are self-fertile. They will fertilize themselves. And you'll notice the small berries going at fruit set. So following along using the ones that Katarina's put out is really, I've just gone to the early season ones to try and put them in perspective for you. Bud break, when you've got the swelling going on at 3 to 5 leaves being present, the 20 to 25 centimeter one, which I mentioned earlier, where you see the actual flower cluster present, the immediate pre-bloom just as the caps are beginning to fall, then you'll go into bloom, and then finally the last part is fruit set. That's about as far as I'm going to talk about today, because otherwise I would probably have to take 3 to 4 or 5 hours to cover everything, and it's just this is an early season approach for you at this point. So which ones are around? Well, when we look at the growth stages that are provided, there's Phomopsis, powdery mildew, downy mildew, black rot, and anthracnose. I know it's site specific. Some people seem to have anthracnose, other people don't. A real oddity in my time in Nova Scotia was the fact that I went into vineyards that had downy mildew but no black rot, and other people had black rot and no downy mildew. And some people had anthracnose, not that many, but a few did. Others, no sign of it. So again, this is why I ask you to take a look at your own vineyard and understand your history of what you have had in the past. Those are your targets for the year coming up. If we look at insect pests, really early in the season, Erinium mite is probably the first insect that you're going to run into. Then phylloxera will make its presence felt. As we move in through the bloom period, we'll start to see phylloxera and possibly mealybug and scale. This has been an issue in central Canada and in Western Canada as well. You may hear some talks in the future talking about mealybug or scale insects and concerns relative to some of the viral diseases. In talking with Dr. Deb Moreau about things like this, mealybug has not really been a big issue, nor has scale, but it's something to be aware of. And then finally, once we get past bloom, and I know people have run into some Japanese beetle, phylloxera, leaf form can still be present. And you may run into two-spotted spider mite or European red mite. And again, the scale and mealybugs can come along as well. So cultivar susceptibility. If I generalize things, hybrids are more prone to anthracnose, black rot, Phomopsis cana leaf spot, downy mildew, and crown gall. Vinifera cultivars don't seem to have as much with anthracnose. They will get black rot, downy mildew, and powdery mildew, but botrytis bunch rot seems to be a much bigger issue with them, as well as sour rot, and grafted vines can have problems with crown gall. Disease I'm going to introduce to you, at least I don't really want to, but it's been around for a while. And it appears now that the Minnesota cultivars are showing more and more incidents of it. In New York, they've had it in Vermont. I've talked to people that have had it in Quebec. Minnesota's reporting it itself, and even in Ontario, where we're growing some of them. And they've had a problem with a disease called ripe rot. Hybrids also from the insect side, phylloxera, Erinium mites, Japanese beetle, mealybugs, and scale. And the vinifera, I tossed in at the end, wasps and hornets. We've had some issues, and I expect a similar thing can happen in Nova Scotia, that when we get close to harvest, if it becomes wet and some of the fruit breaks down, often wasps and hornets will start to show up into the clusters and make it really difficult for harvest, but it's something to be aware of. So I had mentioned before about disease susceptibility and sensitivity. This one is a chart that's been pulled from Cornell as well as Ontario and other places with respect to sulfur and copper, but it's showing the disease susceptibility for beginning with black rot, DM as downy mildew, PM as powdery mildew, botrytis bunch rot, Phomopsis cana leaf spot. Eutypa fits into that category. I wouldn't get as concerned about it. It's part of the old group known as the dead arm disease complex. And what they did was separate out Phomopsis from Eutypa. And finally, crown gall in terms of sensitivity to it. As you notice, if you're looking at mainly the viniferas and some French hybrids, you'll notice that the viniferas are okay for sulfur. But once you get into the French hybrids, then you'll start to see a sensitivity to sulfur. So that limits our ability to use it. And there's questions on copper and just lack of data in terms of it. Most vinifera can tolerate some degree of copper because some people want to use copper sulfate and lime, which is the traditional Bordeaux mixture. And just be aware you may get some burning. On these ones, if you notice, all of the ones, even Reliance, no sensitivity to sulfur. But look at the sensitivities for, again, black rot, downy, powdery, botrytis. Make notes for yourself. Go to these charts and just identify your risk factors. Once you've identified the risk, then you're in a much better position to take a look at how to control things, because this will set your tone of probably which varieties and cultivars need to be sprayed first. A general rule of thumb has been the first to break bud in the spring is often the first harvested in the year. So you can work backwards from there and say, okay, what's my picking dates? I'm likely to have the fruit that I picked first is going to be the first one in the spring, so I better be aware for disease control in that part of the vineyard, more so maybe than the entire vineyard. Frontenac was listed in here in terms of sulfur sensitivity. There wasn't any, and really nothing, nobody knows for copper. However, Frontenac and Frontenac Gris are particularly sensitive. It's showing up to ripe rot. So this is kind of a wild card that's being introduced into the system, and I wanted to make sure that you were aware of it. A number of people have Lucy Kuhlman, Milot, you've got Lacadie, and Foch, Baco, all of those are dominant ones in Nova Scotia. This is the one I had mentioned at the outset I wanted to get across to people, ripe rot. Right now, the Minnesota cultivars, especially Frontenac and Frontenac Gris, are showing sensitivity to it, and it causes a fairly rapid breakdown. I've put in here a web link to an Ohio State fact sheet. It's well written. It's got excellent pictures. When I was first aware of this disease, it was predominantly in the warm, wet climates of the southeast US. It now seems to be moving up the eastern seaboard, and it has been found in Ontario and Quebec as well. So my instinct is telling me it may be present or maybe on its way to Nova Scotia. So be aware and watch out for it. Ripe rot is caused by species of a fungus, and it's multiple species, so it's not a single creature. In the spring, when the temperatures are roughly 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, rains can initiate production and release of spores. So what that means is that this infection period generally occurs and can occur around the bloom period, but you may not see the actual symptoms until much later. Berries are susceptible to infection from bloom through harvest, but generally the symptoms don't appear until veraison. So you may have had an infection early, but it may not appear until later. So I think it's important that you be on the lookout for it. On white or green fruited cultivars, they start out as reddish brown circles, and it may look like sunburn or a chemical injury. It may look like that. However, they expand and they form concentric rings. So what happens is these spores turn to almost a salmon color. And if you look on the lower right, you'll see a bit of fuzziness starting to show up on the fruit, but it'll also blacken over time. It can be easily confused with sour rot. If you suspect in the future, and hopefully if you won't run into it, but I think if you do run into it and you suspect that it might be ripe rot, I would suggest you contact Katarina right away. Hopefully she can get it and take it in and have the people at the diagnostic lab check for Colototricum and see whether ripe rot is present in Nova Scotia. I'm hoping it won't be. I hope you'll find that it's going to basically be, if you had some of it, it might be just a regular sour rot that appears, and that's everywhere. But be on the lookout for this particular disease. Here's the list of what the US has indicated. Now, this is an old list. This is back to 2007, but interestingly, I wasn't aware of this until I started to dig a little deeper, and they highlighted that Frontenac, Frontenac Gris, and Marquette were susceptible to it, and some of the reds. I had run into ripe rot and white rot during my travels in China, but I had not run into it in Ontario nor BC. In talking with people out of Quebec, they seem to have had it a little longer and were more aware of it, but it's something to be aware of. I'm listening to the latest research. Frontenac and Frontenac Gris actually are probably going to move down into the highly susceptible category rather than just being insusceptible. So the key time, you need to scout for things, you need to look for things, you need to think about what's going on. Right now, you're finishing up your pruning, you're probably doing some tying, you're going to take a look around, and you want to start looking for things. Whether you've got crown galls that have started to show up from last year's growth, whether you've got in the center of the screen, in the blue, that's an old powdery mildew infection on the cane. You've got bud swell starting on the upper right and the lower right. Some of you may run into this really interesting thing in that when the vines begin to bleed, suddenly this orange goo will appear on the pruning wounds. Don't worry about it. It's a saprophytic fungi, but it's just something that you may run into. I put the picture in there only to maybe calm the nerves that you're thinking something really wild is happening. It's nothing of consequence. It's opportunistic, and it's strictly saprophytic. In other words, stays on the outside, doesn't do any damage to the plant itself. In Ontario at Bud Swell, we had an issue when we moved grapes into non-traditional areas and put them near large plantings of sweet corn. We were running into flea beetles coming across and causing damage. And what they do, the flea beetle would come in and it would just basically cut the bud. It would actually excavate it and take it out. At this time, you should be also looking for what your bud survival really truly is during bud. And also, this is the time basically to get some early season weed control in place. I know you've had a session on weed control. I'm sure Sonny covered it, but ideally, if you can get a jump on it early in the season, you're always better off later than trying to control it later in the year. When you hit 2 to 3 leaves unfolded, Phomopsis, downy mildew, and black rot can start to appear. You need to start to look. The other one is erinium mite. And here's an example on the lower pictures of erinium mite on the upper surface and lower surface. Some people may think that it's phylloxera, but when you flip it over and you see that white matting, that's not downy mildew. That's the erinium mites and their webbing that they've put in place. The upper surface with the puckering, again, is different than phylloxera. It's not a gall itself. It's just a distension of the leaf. Begin looking at this point. Start looking for it, and you're going to have to think about what you're going to use. Through the bloom period, Phomopsis is an issue, downy mildew, black rot, powdery mildew, phylloxera. Deb Moreau told me, and it was kind of an interesting, once the soil temperature got above 15 Celsius, phylloxera started to move. If it was overwintering in the leaf litter and things on the ground, which is predominant location for it, then it started to move up into the canopy area. So if you do any soil temperature monitoring or have access to any of the local weather stations to get a sense of the temperature, keep your eyes open for it. From fruit set and post bloom, powdery, downy, black rot. The other one is that if you start to see black rot, you see spotting on the leaves, you see the mildew on the upper leaf surface. That's generally powdery mildew. You can run into botrytis, gets a latent infection into the fruit clusters during bloom if it's wet. Again, lots of things to be looking for, lots of decisions. So sketching things out ahead, you can be prepared as to what you might want to use for products in your choice. So reviewing a couple of them kind of quickly, Phomopsis cane leaf spot, you'll get the small chlorotic irregular spots with a dark center. What some people will notice also on the shoots, and this is a newly growing shoot, so it's green. This isn't last year's wood. This is current season's growth. If the infection gets on the cane or on the shoot, it'll give you long, we used to call razor blade nicks. In other words, taking a sharp razor blade and slicing something and it splits open and it'll suddenly form dark lesions. It'll become brittle if it rings the whole shoot. That is your issue relative to cane and leaf spot on the canes. If it does totally encircle the cane, then you can run into breakage. Susceptibility, low, Bacco, Frontenac, Lacadie, New York Muscat, Vidal. However, Foch, Lucy K, Riesling, Savel, I got Riesling twice in there. And also Chardonnay and Deschonach are also very susceptible to Phomopsis. So you want to take a look. Really, the key period for Phomopsis, you're looking intensely up to bloom. You want to look for your lower leaves, kind of shaded areas, because the spores are splashing upwards. Monitor inside the canopy, near wooded areas that are slow to dry. Ideally, you'd want to be checking your hybrids and labruscas because they're more prone to it. Generally, vinifers are pretty much immune in that most of them don't appear to really get it, but you may notice some foliar infections, but I wouldn't get overly concerned. But if you're on a regular protective program, you should be in good shape. Anthracnose is the other one that's a little more dominant for some people in Nova Scotia. It'll give you circular centers, the gray centers, and then all of a sudden they'll fall out on the actual infection. So it'll come up with kind of a shot hole appearance. And it appears that young leaves will get it more severely. Once a leaf matures and it's been expanded for 2 to 3 weeks, new infections won't seem to establish on it. It would always be the younger leaves. It can get on the shoots. It can look somewhat similar to Phomopsis cane leaf spot, but again, it's the grayish in the center, which is separates it from Phomopsis. And on the berries, what you'll notice is little circular spots developing. Now, this is not like black rot or a bullseye that you'd see, but you'll notice that they'll start to sink and fall backwards and often go grayish in color. And the edges will be black. It'll be ringed in a black margin where the centers will be whitish in color or gray. 3 to 5 leaves until harvest, presence of the small spotting, and you'll look for the bird's eye rot. In other words, these funny little spots that start to appear on the berries. By the time it's close to harvest and you see it, this is a note for you to think about controlling it next year. Once you see that, you can't stop it. It's already had its infection take place and cause the injury. But again, you need to put it in your notebook for control for the following year. I'm going to include a few slides from Brian Head. He's great. What you want to do is thinking about the biology, your site preparation, fungicide application. Is there anything new? Well, there really isn't. It's probably the worst thing that we've got out there. Sanitation is probably your step number 1, along with cultural control and also canopy management by having open pruning and open training. It overwinters on the infected fruit mummies and wood and the canes on the ground and in the trellis. Pruning and removing this stuff, putting it in the row center, not beneath the vines, is critical. The spores are released by the rain and they splash upwards. So the closer it is in proximity to your fruiting wood that you've left behind for this year, the more likely you may get an infection take place. Spore germination and infection is dependent on wetness duration and the temperature. So if it's stinking cold and it's wet, you're not likely going to have an infection, but if it's warm and it's wet, you're going to see more. Here are some of the early infections, and this is generally what most people will see is little spots, and there'll be concentric rings. The center will be tan in color, and then you'll notice what I call pepper spots. In other words, black little dots all around the perimeter, and it's in a loose ring. On the petioles of leaves, it will give you elongated lesions, and severe ones, the leaf will actually strangle itself and it will dry out and wilt. So here's the one again, the dark pycnidia, all along the edge, on the spots of the leaves. This was on a Niagara in Erie, Pennsylvania, and on the shoots it'll show it. Lesions will appear about 2 weeks after the original infection took place. So for most people, as the line would be, the horses are already out of the barn by the time you see the symptoms. You have to be anticipating it. So again, more pictures with the lesions, lighter in color, sunken, it's around. Here's what it looks like when it gets to the fruit. So unlike what we were talking earlier with ripe rot in the sinking or anthracnose where it would sink, this one you'll often get the berries go almost half off and they'll start to shrivel back, and then you'll get the spores come out. And they turn brown over time. Again, some more pictures. The reason I put most of these slides in, I know for many of you, we're going to post this as a PDF that you can download and you can print things off or review it on your own time. That was the real reason that I've thrown a number of these extra slides in. So the leaf and shoot tissue is susceptible while expanding. The fruit is really susceptible at the beginning of bloom for roughly 3 to 4 weeks or 4 to 5 weeks if they're vinifera after bloom. Once you're about week 6 past bloom, black rot will no longer be an issue in causing new infections. So your critical window really is the pre-bloom period to about 4 to 5 weeks after bloom. Susceptibility for black rot, Tobacco, Cab Franc, Riesling, Pinot are high-risk ones for those that are growing them. Frontenac, and I would include Frontenac Gris, Lucy K, Foch, Seval are also considered what they call a medium susceptibility to it. But some of the others, Lackady is a low risk to black rot itself. Look for the mummified berries. If you've had this in the past, it's critical. You want to make sure that you're checking leaves around bud break and afterwards, and you monitor the fruit until veraison. So the critical periods are 3 weeks pre-bloom to 2 weeks post-bloom for leaf infections, and from pea size to veraison for fruit infections. If you get them, make note of them. Again, this is not so much that you can control it in the current season, but you will need to be preventative for the following year. Brian sent me, these are old information. So the diseases have been around a long time. They've been investigated forever. Really interesting thing to look at is the temperature. Now the bottom is in Fahrenheit. I didn't go to to be honest, I got the slide from Brian. The US is still in the Fahrenheit mode. But if you notice the number of hours, so for black rot, phomopsis, and downy mildew, when the temperatures get to about 20 Celsius and up, you're down as little as 10 hours, probably 7 hours of wet leaves because they need a film of water for infection to take place. As we all know, Nova Scotia, having something wet for more than 7 or 8 hours is not uncommon. So you need to think about matching it. Yes, early in the year when temperatures are only around 10 Celsius to 12 Celsius, you need much longer duration. But boy, it really drops off. And if you notice, the other one is downy mildew, it really drops off for the primary infections. You go from about 8 hours down to as low as about 2 hours at 20 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. When you think of your fungicides, they are the things that you need to think about. How rain fast is it? What type of material is it? What can I use in my susceptibility periods? Altering compounds, knowing what category they belong to. Is it a group 3, group 4, group 7, group 9? Can it control multiple diseases and pests? Sorting through labels can be a bit of a headache. I've included at the end of this talk a number of tables and charts showing products and what they are listed for in term and a ratingness effectiveness. I suggest this that you take a good close look at it because just because a disease is on a product label does not mean it's going to be really strong. It may have some degree of control, but it may not be good enough in high pressure situations. Be aware of the maximum number of applications or restrictions, as well as reentry intervals and the price. You're always looking at that. Fungicides work. There's 4 ways. There's protectants, there's post-infection. In other words, what this means is we know we've had an infection period, but I have not seen the symptom yet. I'm trying to knock it out before it gets established, or I want to prevent it. I see it there. I want to prevent it from spreading further, so I want it to break the cycle, not allow it to form spores and send them out. Or the last one is eradicants. This is predominantly when the colony, you see the symptoms. Very few fungicides have this activity. So when you have a severe infection, don't get lulled into thinking, wow, it's really severe. I can throw it on and it's all going to dry up for me and I'll see that it's dead. No, you're just going to prevent further infection. You just have to let the life cycle of the disease go through. Systemic or contact means it stays on what it hits. It doesn't move anywhere else in the plant, and it's strictly on the exterior surface of the plant. These ones are the ones that we get concerned about of heavy rainfall, removing them or redistributed. It's an issue that can occur. Unsprayed tissues are not protected. Leaves produced after you spray are also not protected. If you have a systemic product, that means it enters the plant and it goes throughout the plant, it moves around. So in other words, you put it on and it will cover other tissue, including new tissue. They may be protected, provided on how much you used, but at least it gives you a little bit more forward protection before you have to go back in and reapply. Unsprayed tissues, again, because of the movement. Some may be what they call locally systemic. Again, the product labels are critical to read. It moves within the plant tissue. It's rain fast, generally within 4 hours of application. similar to the other systemic materials. However, it only works on the tissues that it actually hits. Leaves produced after an application are not protected, and unsprayed leaves, in other words, if your coverage is poor, those leaves are not going to be protected with locally systemic materials. It will move within the leaf it hits, but it's not moving all over the plant. And last one is translaminar. In other words, it hits one side of the leaf and it'll move through and protect the other side. For some materials, this is important because of where we're going to see it. It doesn't make a lot of sense if we have stuff that gets sprayed on one side of the leaf, but the other side of the leaf is susceptible. No, we need to have it move through. Perennia has put out the pest management guide for grapes. Again, here's the web link for it. When I clicked on it and went to it, what I noticed that it lists each pest, for each pest, the products that are registered. And it provided a lot of information: product name, the ingredient, the rate, pre-harvest interval, re-entry, maximum number of applications, as well as some notes and warnings. It had warnings on toxicity. The one it didn't have in there, though, a lot of times in the notes, it doesn't tell you when this pest will really be active. It's relying up to you to figure out when you need to use the product. As well, it didn't allow you, because you were looking by the pest, it wouldn't tell you what other pests might be controlled. So the product, it can be a little bit difficult to figure out how many different things it might work for. So again, go through it and take a look at it. These are from last year's slides that I had produced, and these are from Wendy McFadden Smith. And it was just really, the C and the E means control, coppers, basically they're contact materials. The S and SAR are, they're what they call activating the natural resistance of the plant. That was Lifeguard and a few others. If you notice, there's virtually no products that control everything. An example being the mancozebs. They're fine for downy, phomopsis, black rot, and anthracnose, but absolutely nothing for powdery mildew. However, if I look at sulfurs and oils, they work fine for powdery, but they don't get anything else. So this is why I'm saying you have to really look and find ways to accumulate for yourself and look at the charts to see how effective they really are. There's an example: copper, a little bit of activity on powdery, but much better on downy, and a touch towards black rot, but not something. Cueva is another product, better on powdery and downy, a little bit on black rot, but nothing for phomopsis. And the full pets, which are Captan, full pan, downy and phomopsis, a little black rot, and some anthracnose. Diplomat, one of the newer materials, good for powdery mildew, nothing on downy mildew though, but it does have phomopsis and black rot. So you can see there's almost a hole with every product that you look at. When we look at 20 centimeters to 6 weeks post-bloom, there's a lot of materials. What I've tried to include in this list is showing you there's lots of materials, but they're almost identical. So if you're in a group 3, you don't want to spray a group 3 material and follow it with another group 3. Similarly, if you use group 7, you don't want to follow it with another group 7. So you have to start looking and saying, okay, what can I do? So really, when we look at it, what we consider virtually all the same are those at the top, Inspire through to Appruvia top. Then if you look at Appruvia top, but it's also included with the group with the category of 7s. And then you've got Property and Vivando, which for powdery mildew, if you're looking for a rotation, is a great one to look at. Both of those products because they work very effectively, but they're also a rotation out of that. But I would not follow a group 50 with another group 50. So you always have to look at your rotations. There are some, if you notice in the group 3 category, that black rot is part of it along with powdery mildew. So if you've had black rot issues in the past, these are probably the materials that you're going to want to take a look at in terms of utilization. Luna Tranquility and Miravis Prime, they're group 7s as well, but they have additional material, and that's what's giving the black rot control. Sulfurs, powdery is fine, but not much else. If we look at these and start to look for powdery downy and a few other things, One is we don't rely on Nova. Nova can be looked at strictly for black rot only. Powdery mildew is resistant. I would not rely upon it for control of powdery, but if I had a severe issue with black rot, I may want to include it once or twice in a season. Similarly, if you look for resistance in terms of powdery mildew, Inspire Super, Flint, and Sovereign, as well as the other Group 11 material in Maravon, I would not be relying on for powdery mildew. Again, problems can occur, so always be aware of what you're looking at. We go into the different groups and work along. Pristine was formerly known as Cantus. Again, resistance, not something that we want to be dealing with at this point. Appruvia, Cantus, Circadus, Appruvia Top, Luna Tranquility, Miravis Prime, and Maravon. They're all essentially the same material. So again, from a rotational standpoint, you would not follow any of those with anything in a group 7. Property and Vivando, as I mentioned before, they can fit into the game. And as we move along with some of the other groups, we look at it, not so much for powdery, they're not very effective, but you'll notice much more activity relative to downy mildew and something like Lifeguard relative to black rot. Stargus is another material for downy and black rot as well. Powdery mildew rescue. The one that came up was, well, what happens if I really get it? Some people, there is a product called Millstop. Organic people will often use bicarbonates. They can kill the superficial mycelium on the leaves and berries, but it doesn't go back. So in other words, it will just basically stop things where they are, but you have to follow very closely. These things, just the locally systemic synthetic materials are not something that I would rely upon, because if it's actively sporulating, then you're likely going to be selecting resistance over time. This is where the Millstop, some sulfur, as well as some of the horticultural oils can be put in place. For downy mildew, the bicarbonates don't work, but the phosphorus acid materials appear to do it the same thing. That kills the superficial mycelium. Again, don't use other systemic materials to try and knock these down. This is where the phosphorus acid materials like Fostrol and things along that line can be used. So a quick summary relative to it. As I said, when you look through the whole season, there's a lot of diseases to consider and think about. Most of you are pretty good at following it through. Can I use cheaper products instead of systemics? Yes, but they rely on having absolute excellent coverage. Cheaper products are generally contact materials that don't move readily through the plant. You should be able to spray the entire vineyard in a day if you've had heavy rain. Yes, they will work, but they may have longer reentry intervals, and you're going to have to put up with possibly losing some crop because they're good, but they're not a silver bullet. I tossed this one in. Katarina had asked me before about sprayer calibrations. A friend of mine is an engineer, and he spent his whole life on sprayers and sprayer calibration. And in chatting with him, he used to do full day seminars for groups because it can't be covered. It takes 3 to 4 hours or more on site for most people to get their hands. What kind of sprayer do you have? Is it an air assist with a blower? Is it electrostatic? Are you using recycling? Can you cover all of it in the time you have available? How much volume will it put out? And is it good coverage that you're going to get? Your nozzle setup, droplet size, is there drift issues that you might have to worry about, especially if you've got cultivars nearby and you're using a product in which another cultivar might be sensitive? Proper airspeed. I did a lot of work on assessing sprayer coverage over the years and found that most people, their fan speed on their sprayers are far too high, and they did a great job of blowing the spray through the canopy to the middle of the next row, but it never did reach the row opposite. Some people believe you can spray through and cover 4 rows at a time with a single pass. It might work for 1 or 2 sprays really early, but the minute you've got 2 to 3 leaves, your coverage drops dramatically. So that's just a little forewarning of 40 years experience. If anybody has questions, Katarina, you could send questions to her. I suggest if you have anything specific and you want to get in touch with me, that's fine. Katarina, has anybody submitted any questions so far for today?
So far, we do not have any questions, but anyone who would like to ask anything, please put it either in the chat or email us after. We've had some questions on the previous session with people emailing us after the session.
Yep.
And that's completely fine.
Yep, that's good.
So, yep, if anyone has anything that is a burning question, you can put it in the chat right now.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can let things percolate and we'll
So
answer it afterwards.
while they're thinking of things, I'll finish off with a few slides I'd mentioned earlier. Here's an example of the tables and the charts I had put together, showing alphabetically the fungicides that had been labeled and were available. This was taken from the Perennia information from last year. There's one product not in there, but I will let you know where it is. And it just gave an idea, and people were asking about organics. And so some of them are either certified or not. If there's an A, then it was certified for it. But you need to check with the product label, and you'll need to go to OMRI, your organic certification group, to make sure that that's what you're going for. But it was a way to take at least the product and have a quick check to figure out, did it work or did it not work for those ones? As I mentioned at the beginning, just because it's on the label doesn't always mean it's the best choice. Here's some more from Diplomat right through to Intuity, following the fungicides that went along. These are disease charts. I didn't put insecticide charts in. They're pretty generic, but it also explains whether it's a contact material or whether I can consider it locally systemic. In other words, I'll get some absorption. And if I can get it on and get it dry for about 4 hours, I'm an okay guy. Because I know that it's going to stay with the plant even if it rains shortly thereafter. Where you get more concerned is when you're starting to look at contact materials, because they generally need about 6 to 8 hours of good drying time before any precipitation to stay on the plant. More materials. It's amazing how much stuff is registered on grape in Canada, but a lot of them are repetitive and very similar to one another. That's why you need to look at the group number as well as how they work and what diseases they work on. Oxidate is an interesting one. Oh, you got something?
Yes, so we have a question and asking, this is a 3-point scale or the 4-point OMAFRA scale?
I believe this is the 3-point scale that had been put out before. I don't believe there's any 4s in there. The OMAF one was what Wendy had come up with because she wanted to go past the point of saying, when she was doing her research trial, she separated them out a little more finely. I would say this is a 3 is considered excellent, 2 would be considered good, and a 1's considered okay, but you're probably not going to be happy with the control, and 0 means don't expect any control with it.
Okay, we have another question.
Yep.
Can you comment on label rates in relation to canopy? Early season sprays require less chemical than late season with a full canopy. Still, the label rate doesn't change.
Most labels have a change over time based on growth stage if you look at them closely. They don't have a single rate per season. Everything is based on coverage. You need the amount of active ingredient present to get it. When you see a rate increase, it's taking into account that there's more leaf area to cover. I call it the painting theory. If I can paint something with a half liter of paint and suddenly I go into a room that's 5 times the size, I'm going to need more than a half a liter of paint to do it, to get across. But it's critical concentration. So the labels will tell you what you need to use over the season.
Okay. That's all for now for those 2 questions.
Again, a few more extra slides relative to it. Some people ask quickly about organics. You have to really look at, can I do it? Can I stay with it? Generally, they don't last as long. Precipitation is probably the biggest nightmare for most people. And you have to scout. It's something that you have to do regularly to make an organic system work. People are doing it. It requires your feet on the ground on a daily basis to take a look at everything and the ability to get back in and apply materials if you get a heavy rain, because you're going to likely have your residues washed off. Here's some of the organic materials and what they're for. But if you notice, every one of them is a contact material on the surface of the leaves or being on the fruit clusters. The only one that potentially was locally systemic was Problad. It's soft, but it wasn't certified as organic. So by soft, less impact on the environment. But if you're a certified organic producer, this one probably won't meet the grade of maintaining your organic certification. So that was why I wanted people to be aware that sometimes it says it's good, but in fact, unless it's listed by OMRI, I wouldn't classify it as organic. Lifeguard is another one. Lime sulfur, microscopic sulfur, that's a very specific brand, microthiol, but not all sulfurs are organically certified. Millstop and oxidate, millstop for powdery mildew, oxidate is a peroxide type material. They're okay, they're a knockdown material, but I wouldn't classify them as super heavy. And similarly, some of the oils are considered organic, but again, primarily contact materials. And that's everything. A ton of slides in 50 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. Any more questions, please put them in the chat. And I will put on, oh, what is your comment on Oxidate 2.0?
Oxidate works, but it's a very short term. It's almost like a surface sterilant per se. Again, it's a peroxide type material, not long life material though. It's a very short activity period.
Okay. Perfect. All right, and I've also just posted the QR code for the pesticide points as well. So if anyone is interested, they can scan that as well, or let me know after and I can resend the slide. All right.
Well, it's good. Looks like the number I see on my screen shows 27 participants.
Yep, I'm impressed. Thank you, everyone. Yep, thank you everyone for joining today.
Again, if you've got questions, reach out and we'll get back to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Enjoy what looks like sunshine outside.
Yeah, we've got sunshine in Ontario. We had rain earlier. I think it's coming your way.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Thanks.
See
Take
you,
care,
everyone.
everyone. Bye-bye.